Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to be at MSR today, and thank you, Komodan, for giving me the opportunity to come. And as Komodan was mentioning, I work in AI and I work in various subfields of AI, but today I'm going to be talking about decision theoretic crowdsourcing. And the way we are going to go forward in this talk is that I'm going to start with, I'm assuming pretty much all of you know about crowdsourcing and know the importance and the amount of activity that has been happening in the crowdsourcing space in the last few years. But just to be on the same page, I'm going to give a small motivation, as at least from my perspective, as to how I see the strengths and weaknesses of crowdsourcing. But the more important question would be, what are the challenges that we need to solve in order to make crowdsourcing successful, which would lead us to the design of our particular agent called Clowdr. And in most of my talk today, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to give you several manifestations of Clowdr in different scenarios. I'll start from something really simple, and then we'll build the concepts, and then we'll take more jumps on more interesting questions. So that's the outline. And again, let's keep this interactive. Please ask me questions, whatever you have at any point in time. This is an informal talk by all means. So I think one of the most famous examples of crowdsourcing today is Wikipedia. Launched in 2001, you notice that in a few years, there was a huge amount of activity that started happening. And that activity is happening because people realize that now they can actually contribute their knowledge to making this largest encyclopedia in the world. There were 16 million editors after some time, 4 million articles had been written, and now we have Wikipedias in about 283 languages. And this was only possible because all these people came together to solve one common problem for one common purpose, and it became really explosive and exponential. Now this is a famous example, but there are many other examples. A very related example is this website called Galaxy Zoo. Now what is Galaxy Zoo? This is a bunch of British astronomers who said that our machine learning systems are not yet there. This is unfortunate for AI person like me, but that is the reality. The machine learning systems were very bad at identifying the galaxies in the images. So they said, okay, we are getting all these problems. What if we ask people like you and me to label galaxies? Now we can always ask astronomers and get high quality data, but people like you and me don't really know much astronomy, so we may have to be taught. But the question they were asking is, can we recruit citizen scientists who will come there and contribute just for the fact that they will get to contribute to science? Within 24 hours of launch, they publicized it on BBC. Within 24 hours of launch, they were getting 70,000 classifications per hour. More importantly, within 6 hours of launch, their website went down because there was so much traffic. So many people wanted to label galaxies that the website went down. Of course, they were smart enough. They had good collaborators. They put the website back on in a few hours, and they were getting these kind of classification rates. And after first year, they had already got 50 million classifications. More interestingly, when people start coming to solve a problem, they start to have fun with it. So they started collecting galaxies which look like various animals. Okay, that's for fun. But in the same process, they recognized such green dots. And they said, okay, this looks like a green pea, the matar ka dana. So they started collecting these images on a bulletin board just to create these, images where such green dots appeared. And later, an astronomer got involved, and they realized that it's a specific kind of galaxy, which was always present in the images, but no astronomer had ever taken the time to look at them. And so they are called P galaxies, and more than 1,000 of those have been discovered so far. Such things are only possible when there are a lot of human eyes on the data, and crowdsourcing allows you. Another form of crowdsourcing that has now become extremely popular, and this is what we will be focusing most of today on, is crowdsourcing marketplaces, more financially motivated crowdsourcing. And the idea there is that there are lots of websites which are marketplaces where a lot of workers are lurking around, and somebody like you and me who may have a job that they want a human to do, we are called requesters, will request somebody to do that job and say that, okay, I'm going to pay you some amount of money for it. And then somebody will pick it up and solve that, and they'll get their money. Amazon Mechanical Turk is a prime example, which circa a couple of years back had over 500,000 workers. And in fact, 20 to 30% of the workers depended on Mechanical Turk for their primary source of income. So this was becoming something that people thought of as employment more than additional money. Excuse me. There's another website called Odesk, which has about $30 million per month of cash flow through it. And there's another website or another system called MobileWorks, which is based in India. And there are many others like that. And then these are just a few examples, but I'm sure some of you know about the games like Foldit and ESP, where people play the game and in the process generate important data or contribute to science. CAPTCHA, when you are using CAPTCHA for authentication, in the back end, books are getting digitized. This is a startup in India, and there are many others like this, where the agricultural best practices from one village are communicated to other villages by means of mobile phones. WizWiz is a creative application where blind people can get acclimatized to a new surrounding when by using crowdsourcing, by taking help of crowdsourced workers. When earthquakes happened in Haiti, a lot of the relief works were facilitated by or were moderated by crowdsourced workers. There are new conferences that are coming up, and the amount of activity that is happening in the research community is just amazing. And these are again a few examples. This is what crowdsourcing industry landscape looked like in 2011 May. And by the rate of growth that is happening, I'm sure this has already doubled the size of the number of industry interested in crowdsourcing. From my perspective, I see crowdsourcing as bringing in some very distinct advantages. So first of all, something that is probably closest to my heart is that I believe now world is becoming like a unified labor force. So think of it like some kind of a global meritocracy, that irrespective of where you live, if you are smart or if you have a skill that is you can share and make money, you are not at a disadvantage. You can actually use that skill and make your money irrespective of where you live, which is pretty cool. So it gets work to inaccessible regions. Of course, the most useful strength for people like us is that it can be thought of as cloud computing for human work. So as we pay money for a machine on an as needed basis, we can pay money for human work on an as needed basis. So it is very easy to test new ideas, which is perfect for startups, and startups can easily scale. So if more work comes in, they can scale up. If work doesn't come in, they don't have to use their money. And also, a lot of new creative applications are coming up due to crowdsourcing, because now you can imagine that there's a employment opportunity 24/7. So 24 hours every time of the day, there are people that you can hire at that moment. So people are coming up with these really creative applications where there's crowd inside your camera or there's crowd inside your word processor. So very soon, I'm sure Microsoft must be thinking about that too. You can have a word processor where you can shorten the paragraphs and you can do grammatical corrections or rewrites by having crowd internally. This is work done at MIT. So I believe that this is really fascinating, and there are lots of new possibilities that are emerging due to crowdsourcing. But I've of course painted somewhat of a rosy picture, because there are a lot of challenges that are required to be solved in order to achieve the full potential of crowdsourcing. And one of the most important challenge, obviously, as you and I will start thinking about it, is variance in worker quality. There are these random people who are from all over the world who have different strengths and weaknesses. Anybody can take your job and do work. Are they going to give you good quality output or not so good quality output is the biggest question we need to answer. And if we don't get high quality output, then crowdsourcing fails miserably. So whole exercise in crowdsourcing research today and in the company's products and so on has been, how can I create ways and means so that I can get high quality output using crowdsourced methods. Often what people do is that they divide a complex task into small work units. The reason is that most of these people on Mechanical Turk and so on have some kind of an attention deficit disorder. You give them a really large task, most likely they are not going to do it, right? They are happy doing small bits of jobs and getting small amounts of money. This is how their process is right now. Of course, that may change tomorrow. And so people convert a complex task into workflows. Now, how do I create such workflows? How do I test such workflows? How do I optimize such workflows? Are all open questions. And moreover, all these requesters need strong computational skills, because only then can they create such workflows and optimization. And therefore, it puts a price on being able to do this kind of work through crowdsourcing. And so another question we have been asking is, can we create general purpose tools so that these requesters get help, get support, and they're able to utilize crowdsourcing successfully. So as you may see, there are lots of questions, lots of challenges that we need to answer, and I believe, and hopefully I will try to convey this, is that this is a great application area for AI techniques, because AI techniques are very good in supporting the process of managing high quality output, testing workflows, optimization, creating general purpose tools. Okay. So this is our vision. The vision is to explore and demonstrate the value of AI to crowdsourcing. This is the goal of our project. In that context, we want to come up with a unified tool, unified crowdsourcing platform, not a platform, but a tool that allows the requesters to succeed through crowdsourcing. And there are many components that we will have to have in this tool. For example, we will have to have a language so that you can specify your workflow to us. We will have to have shared models for different kinds of tasks, modeling of workers, and some kind of a control. And I'm going to talk more about all of these points very soon. We call our system Clowder. The goal is to have an integrated AI agent for that. So this is what sort of the Clowder looks like. It's a general AI agent. This is almost like AI 101. So any AI agent has the following characteristics. So this is an agent. It is interacting in an environment, and maybe somebody is telling the agent what it needs to do. So the master is giving the task, and the agent can take actions in the environment, get feedback from the environment, and finally return the results to the master. So if you have to design Clowder in the following form, then what does the Clowder look like? Well, the environment now becomes people. So this is the agent. It is interacting with people on the crowdsourcing platform. The master is now the requester, which is telling the agent what tasks are needed to be solved. So the master tells the tasks, maybe the workflows, and the agent gives jobs to people. People give back work, and at some point the agent decides that I am done, I can submit my output. And now, in order to make such an agent, we have to answer a lot of AI questions. For example, on the knowledge representation side, I want to figure out what is a good language so that the requester can specify the workflow. What kind of knowledge do I need to learn? What kind of knowledge do I need for the workers? What kind of knowledge do I need for the tasks? The learning component says, okay, you need all this knowledge, okay, learn it. So you have to learn workflow parameters, learn worker abilities, learn task parameters, and so on and so forth. And the planning component has to take actions, and those actions would be which workflow do I choose, which job do I post, when do I know that I am done, and submit. And what I'm going to describe to you is a first cut on all of these questions. So that is the space of the talk, and if there are no questions, then let me get into a little bit of details. And so now I'll get more into the AI side of things as to how we do this. But I'm going to start very simple, and I'm going to start with a really simple problem of binary choice questions. Okay. So here's a binary choice question. Is this galaxy simply smooth and rounded with no sign of a disk? The galaxy is in the image. Now this is a question that is actually asked on Galaxy Zoo, and workers are going to tell me whether the answer is yes or the answer is no. So this is binary choice questions. Or there may be other binary choice questions like whether this database entry and this database entries are for the same person or not. So this is a database cleaning task, and you can pretty much imagine that a lot of the problems that you may want workers to support you with will be simple yes-no questions. Of course, this is a restriction, but we are starting there so that we can learn, we can develop the concepts which can then be generalized. Alright. So this is the goal that we want to solve. The goal is that I want to automatically achieve high quality output. This is sort of the primary goal. And in the process, I have to also automatically figure out who are the bad workers, who are the good workers, reward the good workers, detect the spammers, and so on and so forth. Now, in a crowdsourcing space, when you give a job to the worker may not give you the correct answer. So we call them noisy workers. Now, of course, noisy not in the context of the pun of noisy, but right now, the workers are giving me noisy answers. So sort of the basic first common solution that people work on for quality control is called majority voting, right? So instead of asking one worker one question, I'm going to ask 10 workers the same question or 9 workers the same question, and I will pick the answer that many workers or more workers choose. Very simple solution. Ask several workers and aggregate answers. So let's start from there. So in the majority voting paradigm, you can imagine that different workers are giving me the correct answer with a probability p. And if probability p is 1, then I only need to ask one worker. And if the probability p is 0.9, then maybe in 5 workers I get really close to 1 accuracy, and so on and so forth. So this is the quality of the solution as the value of p decreases. And of course, if it decreases below 0.5, then workers become adversarial. And workers are rarely adversarial. Workers are rarely adversarial in a real setting, so we will ignore this particular case. Now, around 2008, Ryan Snow and Stanford showed that for NLP tasks, a majority vote of 8 to 9 Turkers was even better than a single expert. And this was quite surprising to us at the time, because I was not working in crowdsourcing then. And one would have thought then that these workers may be able to do really simple jobs, but they will not be skilled workers, and therefore most likely they are not going to get you high quality answers for jobs which require skill. However, for NLP tasks, and now some of you may believe that NLP is really skilled, and some of you may believe that NLP is just English, so it's less skilled. I don't want to take a claim here, but they found that 8 to 9 workers were better than one expert, which was really interesting. And what was happening was that there was some wisdom of crowds that was coming into the picture when many workers were answering the single question. Now, of course, as a probabilistic model, this is somewhat limited, and its basic limitation is the fact that all probabilities of all workers are assumed to be equal. Obviously, in real life, all workers are not made equal, and therefore, if there is a model which allows for varying qualities in workers, then that model will be more expressive and more useful. So let's start to build that model. And so you may imagine that we have a parameter gamma which tells me how good the worker is. And so gamma equal to 0 sort of means that this worker is probably not very good. The best that worker can do is random guessing. So Homer Simpson is probably the ideal example of such a worker. On the other hand, you may imagine gamma equal to infinity, where pretty much whatever question you pose to the guy is going to give me the correct answer. And so Alan Turing may be a good example there, possibly. But most of us are somewhere in the middle. We have some gamma value which is between 0 and infinity. Now, given a gamma value, now I can start to create a voting model which allows for varying qualities of workers. I'm going to use the word vote and ballot interchangeably. So imagine that there is a true answer to the question which is hidden. Okay. And there are workers who have their gamma parameters. So a vote that I get to see is generated by the true answer, a combination of the true answer and the worker ability. So for example, worker ability is infinite, then the ballot will be exactly equal to the true value. Worker ability is 0, then worker may be just completely random guessing, but somewhere in the middle it depends. So this is something that we want to create. And suppose we had such a model, then we will have some basic Bayes rule, and we can say that the probability that the correct answer is V, given I have seen n ballots, can be computed from a basic Bayes rule. Alright, so this is relatively straightforward. However, that I have built one assumption in the process, and the assumption here is that I am assuming that all workers are independent of each other. Now think for it for a minute. Are the workers independent of each other? Are the workers independently generating their responses only based on the true value? And as at the first, it looks like a reasonable assumption, because you may sort of believe that because there are millions of workers or 500,000 workers, they are not creating a cohort and they are not asking each other and working towards defeating a system. Most likely this is a fair assumption. But it is actually not an accurate assumption because of a subtlety. And the reason is the following. So suppose I ask you this question: which of the rectangle or the diamond has a larger area? Then pretty much all of you are going to pick that the rectangle has a larger area. However, if I ask you the question, which of the triangle and the circle has the larger area, and you probably don't have that, you are scientists, so maybe you will all agree, but more or less you will find that more people will be confused on this question. Now, is it because the workers are cohorting and coming together and defeating the system? Obviously not. What is happening is that the worker responses are not completely independent, they depend on the inherent difficulty of the question. So, if I ask an easy question, then all workers are going to give me a correct answer, and if I ask a really hard question, pretty much all workers are going to give me confused answers, and that is because their answers not only depend on the true answer, but also on the intrinsic difficulty of the problem. So, therefore, by realizing this, we define this notion of intrinsic difficulty, which is a value between 0 and 1, and now we make the following assumption. We say that there is a notion of conditional independence. So, given intrinsic difficulty of the problem, the workers will be independent of each other. So, now let us create a model which has this assumption built in. So, on the x-axis, I have the difficulty of the question, and on the y-axis, I have the probability that they are going to give me the correct answer. So, now if the difficulty of the question is 0, which is an ideal case, then you can imagine that pretty much everybody is going to give me the correct answer. On the other hand, if the difficulty of the question is 1, which is another ideal case, then you can assume that irrespective of who you are always going to give me a random answer, either yes or no. So, with probability 0.5, you are going to give me the correct answer. How you transition between 1 and 0.5 depends on your gamma value. So, a good worker will transition slowly, and a not so good worker may transition rather fast. And so, we defined a system of equations which depend on the gamma values, and this is the accuracy as a function of the difficulty, and so that gives us different curves. All right. So, this is our model. Yes, question.
Why not ask every Turker to also specify how difficult the question is?
You could do that. Of course, that reduces the productivity of the system. People have thought about asking Turkers whether they are confident about their answers or not, but those things do not work because the Turker does not have incentive to speak the truth. Because if they are not confident of the answer and they tell us, then what will happen is that we may disregard their answers and so on and so forth, and they may lose their money or they may not be given more work in the future. So, whatever systems we create, because there is a lot of game theory involved in these things, we have to make sure that the questions that we are asking are most likely going to get high quality answers. Difficulty of the question, yes, one could try. I haven't heard or seen people do that. One of the reasons why difficulty of the question as a number between 0 and 1 is a hard thing, because people are not very good with numeric scores. They are very good with ranking things, saying that this is more difficult than that, but giving it a numeric score is very difficult. So, one may have to consider more AI techniques to sort of correct for the bias of a worker in their difficulty scores, but yeah, this is something one could explore. Yes.
So, the gamma is on a per worker basis.
Yes.
But shouldn't the difficulty also be on a per worker basis? Because let's say you ask me to translate a Russian sentence, very difficult for me. For the Russian people, it's very easy.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think difficulty of a question and ability of a worker are analogs to each other. So, you could believe that for the question that requires the ability of speaking Russian, the ability of the worker is high, or the difficulty of the question for that worker is low. They are analogous concepts.
But you're saying that gamma is sort of tracking the ability of the worker.
Individual worker on that task.
And D is, you're saying, is related to gamma.
D is an analogous concept, but by having it being per worker, you are just multiplying the parameters. They are not capturing individual independent concepts, independent phenomena. But by having difficulty which is the same for all workers, you are saying that some questions are easy, some questions are difficult in the same space by and large, and then some people are good for these kind of questions and some people are not so good in these kinds of questions, which are different space. So, for this difficulty, all the workers, a difficult question will be difficult for all the workers. Their ability will capture how difficult it would be. So, it is one way of modeling it. You could have modeled it slightly differently, I guess. But I think we are capturing all the important notions which are required for us to see how good the worker answers are. And of course, we are building in the assumption that workers are not adversarial. So, okay, so the next question is, how do I learn these parameters. So I have defined lots of parameters, and it's easy to come up with these parameters, but the critical thing is how do I learn them. So here my parameters are: what are the true value of the questions, what are the difficulties of the questions, what are the abilities of the various workers. Now there are two main ways to do this. You may believe that there may be supervised data. So given a new task, there are people who ask those questions, so they will sort of fill in the answers for some of them, and that will give me some labeled data. That is one way to think about it, but that puts in additional pressure on the requester to give me additional data. So I want to reduce that, and in order to be able to reduce that, I want to see if I can do things with unsupervised approaches. So a standard algorithm for unsupervised approaches is the EM algorithm, or also called expectation maximization. So again, this becomes our model. This is the difficulty of the task, this is the worker, the true value, this is the worker ability. There are some priors on the difficulties and the abilities, and now I want to do, the only thing that I get to observe are the ballots. And so I want to estimate all the parameters of the system so that the probability of observing the ballots is maximized. And so the EM algorithm will make the following decisions. It will say, if a lot of people disagree on a task, most likely it's a difficult task. If a lot of people agree on the task, most likely it's an easy task. If one person commonly agrees with others, most likely that person is a good worker. But if one person commonly disagrees with the others, quite likely that person is a spammer. And as I start to know this information, then more information gets to percolate on the other middle cases. For example, if it's a hard task, then the person who is known to be good is trusted more as opposed to other workers. Okay, so far, yes, questions?
Makes sense to do this in a semi-supervised setting?
Absolutely. So the model is completely oblivious. So if you have some labeled data, then you can put that in, and it will be able to handle those labeled data points accordingly. If you don't have any labeled data, it will generate those labeled data in order to optimize the system. So any data you have, this model will be able to naturally capture it. Okay. So far we have talked a little bit about knowledge representation, and we have talked a little bit about how to learn that knowledge. So now let's get to the planning component. And the planning component is, in this particular simple scenario, how many workers do I ask per question? That is a question that I have to ask, right? And a simple strategy in this scenario is also learn the number of workers that are needed to get the desired average accuracy. Like you do some tests and you ask 7 people, 5 people, 9 people, and on average see, if I ask 7 people, what is my accuracy? If I ask 9 people, how much is my accuracy? And if I have an accuracy point that I want to reach, I choose the number of workers which gets me to that particular point. That is the common approach. However, that is not an ideal approach. This is not very good. And the reason it is not very good is because at some level, the intuition suggests that if it's a difficult question, it should get more ballots. If it's an easy question, then I probably don't need that many number of ballots. Or if a good worker comes and answers a question, maybe I do not need many more votes, right? So in some sense, what I need is that I need to optimize these workflows in a more dynamic fashion. I need to see, based on the exact history of who has worked on this problem and what answers they have given me, I would be able to figure out whether I need more answers or I am confident enough and I can stop the process. And that will be most exciting. So intuitively, this is what is happening. So this is the model for Clowder. The new task comes along and the model, you have to figure out whether you need more votes. If you need more votes, then you generate a ballot job, and that means somebody in the crowd will answer my question. As I get new ballots, that lets me to update my posterior distribution about the true value, about the difficulty of the question, and so on and so forth. And then I re-ask the question, do I need more ballots? And at some point I decide I do not need more ballots, in which case I submit the answer which has the maximum probability of being correct given the votes that I have seen so far. And the Clowder decision problem is, how do I compute whether I need more ballots or not? Now this is studied in the field of AI under the name of decision making under uncertainty. It's a decision making problem because I have to figure out what to do. I have to take different actions. And it's under uncertainty problem because the crowd will give me probabilistic responses. Different people in the crowd can take the job and they will give me correct answer with different probabilities. Moreover, it's a partially observable environment, which means I never know exactly which state am I in. And let me explain that better. So there is a model called partially observable Markov decision process, which models the scenario of sequential decision making under uncertainty, where the state of the system is not completely known. Okay, so let us model this problem as a POMDB. Again, I can't get into the details of a POMDB process, but what we'll do, we'll try to model the problem as a POMDB. At least we can talk about the inputs of the system. So the state of the system is, say, the difficulty of the task and the true value of the question, and the true value of the answer. And there is another state of the system which is the goal, and the goal is when I have submitted the answer. So I am done, my process has finished. Okay, so these are my two states in the system. Now my actions are whether to generate a ballot job or whether to submit the best answer. When I submit the best answer, I transition from this world state to the goal state where I have submitted. So that's the easy part. On the other hand, if I generate a ballot job, I get a new vote, but that doesn't change my state. The difficulty of the question does not change, the true value of the question does not change. What happens, however, is that I get a new observation about these two quantities. So I don't know the difficulty of the question, I don't know the true answer, and as I generate my ballots, I get more observations about it. And because I don't know my state exactly, that is why it's called a partially observable environment, or a POMDB. Now, it's an optimization problem, so at some point I need to balance utility and money, and so we also define the notion of a cost, which is how much money am I spending in each, say, ballot job. And I will define some notion of a reward, which tells me how much is the correct answer worth for me. So this is one way of defining reward. It says that if I submit the correct answer, I don't get anything, and if I submit an incorrect answer, I am penalized a penalty of minus p. And this p could be a bigger number or small number. So the process has to maximize the expected value of reward minus cost. Okay. So this is what we have modeled. We have modeled our problem of control of workflows as a POMDB. And now POMDB is a highly studied area. It's also somewhat advanced, so there is no way I'm going to be able to talk about the algorithms in too much detail. But what I can give you the highest bit idea is that state is hidden, and therefore the agent has to maintain a probability distribution of states. That is called a belief. And the agent makes a decisions based on the belief. So it has to assign some value for how good each belief state is, and then it has to compute this value. Bellman in 50s or maybe later down the line through his work, we defined a system of nonlinear equations. Nonlinearity comes because of the max, and you have to compute the solution to the system, which happens through dynamic programming. Because belief is a probability distribution over states, that's a continuous space, you have to do lots of approximations. So there is a lot of work that we need to do in order to solve the POMDB, but modeling it as a POMDB is a relatively easier phenomenon in this particular case. So let us assume that we can solve the POMDB. But let me give you the intuition of what is happening. So the intuition is that initially the system says, I don't know the correct answer, maybe it is yes, maybe it is no. Let's say I have equal probability that it's 0.5, 0.5. Then it submits a ballot job, and maybe the answer is yes. Somebody comes along and gives the answer yes. So that changes my belief about what my current state is. So my belief is now, let's say that the answer is yes with probability 0.6 and no with probability 0.4. So the system has to figure out whether it is good enough to submit or should it do more ballots. Right? So suppose it figures out that okay, it's good enough to submit to do more ballots, I should do more ballots. It submits a ballot job, and a person who is known to be a good worker comes along, and he or she says that the answer is yes. So maybe because the worker is good, my belief changes significantly, and now my system believes that the answer is yes with probability 0.9 and no with probability 0.1. At this point again, the system makes thinks about whether it is worth for me to do more ballots. Now the answer may be no, but it may take my system a lot of questions in order to figure out that the answer is no, because at this moment it is heavily believing that the answer is yes. So it balances off that amount of money it will spend in proving that the answer is no versus the expected gains from it and the cost that you will have to spend and the penalty, and at some point it may say this is good enough, I am happy with this, I am going to submit, in which case it will submit the answer yes. So this is the kind of reasoning that is happening inside a POMDB. Alright, so at this point, yes.
Is there in the previous slide, is there an assumption that when you give out a ballot job, it can go to any participant as opposed to, say, a really good participant?
Right, that's a great question. That is something that we can change, but in our particular experiments, because we were doing experiments on Mechanical Turk, and the way it works out on Mechanical Turk is that you post a job openly and anybody picks it up, right? Therefore, you don't have control on exactly who is going to work on the task.
You can have controls over minimum reputation or such.
Yes, so we have that. So we have the control on the minimum reputation to be 95% or something like that. But still, the exact person who's going to pick, and therefore their ability on this particular task may or may not be known to us, and we can't pick that. So in our processing, the way we formulate it is that we say that every next worker that is going to come is going to be an average worker. Now you can put that distribution in the process also, and you can say that the worker may be chosen randomly from this pool of workers, and this pool may tell me what are the probability distributions are. What is even more interesting is that Amazon Mechanical Turk is one platform, and therefore you have to deal with the platform because you have to do experiments. But if you had the ability to say, okay, I have the crowd of 10,000 people, I have one more question, whom should I ask? That is a much more interesting question. And there the question would be, how do I manage 10,000 people so that they all get some work, they all contribute to getting high quality work, but they are still better and not so good because it's a distribution. So how do I judiciously use the abilities of good workers only in the tasks where it matters? These are really fascinating questions, and I'm interested in those questions. And I think similar models will work out, but we have yet to do this. Great question. So, yes.
So how do you modify the probabilities? Do you use some payoff function or?
The payoff function is this. So the payoff function tells me that the reward of submitting the correct answer is 0 and submitting the incorrect answer is minus p. You also have a model for how the workers are going to behave given their gamma and the difficulty. And you are always estimating the difficulty, the distribution of the difficulty, distribution of the values, and therefore the long-term payoffs. So here is the quick experiments. Most people do majority voting in life. So that is a static workflow. The number of votes depend on so that this red and blue spend the same amount of money. And so on the second graph, you see that on the x-axis you have penalty for an incorrect answer, and obviously you imagine that as the penalty of the incorrect answer increases, correct answer becomes more and more valuable, and so your accuracy will increase, which is what is happening. But the accuracy of the Clowder system is much higher than the accuracy of the majority vote, and the reason is that the Clowder system is intelligently figuring out whom or when to put in more money, in which questions do I put in more money, and in which questions do I not put in more money. And because of that reasoning, it is able to optimize this process much better and get some much higher accuracy and get some much higher value for the money. So here are some of the interesting intuitions it is able to capture. So for example, if a question is really hard, you would find Clowder system not spending much money on it. And the reason would be that it will figure out that the amount of money it will have to spend in order to answer that question will be so much that it is not worth it. That kind of reasoning it is able to do. It is definitely able to get much better quality output because it is capturing the workers and understanding how good each worker is. And it has the potential to handle tricky questions, because if a question is difficult and if a known good worker comes along and answers that question, then maybe the system trusts that worker much more than maybe 5 other workers who are known to be not that great and answer something else. All right. So let us summarize this part of the talk, and what we have discussed so far is a generative model for worker response. It is a standard Bayesian network, and the model captures this notion of question difficulty and worker ability, and an approach for joint learning of this using which is an unsupervised approach using EM. We also talked about how to do decision making, and we use POMDPs, which gives me much higher quality output for the same price. And lastly, we are about to release this system in a few weeks, and what would happen is that if you have a task that you want to crowdsource, the system will automatically control it completely for you. It is also an inbuilt reinforcement learning bit worked on, which I am not getting into today. But given a new task, it will automatically start tracking workers, learning the parameters of the task, and in the process optimize it for you. All right. Now, so far I have described to you really simple tasks. The binary question, yes and no question. Obviously, that is less exciting because it's a very simple question, although it's probably the most famous subset of questions that get used in micro crowdsourcing platforms like Mechanical Turk. But what is most interesting is that now the ideas that we have developed the idea of some kind of a worker response model, we have developed the idea of learning of that model, and we have developed the idea of POMDP based control. These ideas are going to stick with us through the rest of the other examples, other possibilities. So here's one example, infinite choices. Okay, so here's a question, cut and paste the Amazon page for the product in this picture. Okay, I saw this product, this book, I want to buy this. Okay, I took an image and it goes to Amazon Mechanical Turk for figuring out how can I buy this product. Now this is not a yes no question. The worker response will be an answer, and therefore you can imagine that the space of the answers is somewhat infinite, because the work answer can be anything or at least huge. How do I handle this? The idea is again the same. You have to come up with a worker model, you have to come up with a controller, but the only difference is that you have to think about how do you handle the infiniteness in the problem, because there are infinite possible answer choices. So again, if you are interested in some of this, the way we work this out is that we have to use something called Chinese restaurant process, which handles infinite answers for us, and we have to think creatively of how do we cast the POMDP model so that it can handle infinite spaces. I wouldn't get into the details, but let me give you some of our results on one of the first tasks that we have worked on so far. This is sort of work in progress. So this is 131st SAT questions, math questions, and so the majority vote is paying the same amount of money as Clowder, but majority vote is getting 95% accuracy. These are simple questions, and Clowder is getting 99.25. So basically, Clowder is missing one question, and it's almost 83% error reduction. And the reason this is happening is one or a couple of those are tricky questions, and our system figures out that this particular worker is a good worker, and so the system trusts that worker more than the majority, and that is where it gets the higher quality answers. All right. Now I come to the more exciting part of my talk. This is more exciting for me personally, and that is more interesting tasks outside of these really bit-sized jobs like give me the correct answer for this choice or tick one of the two. So if you have a much more complex task at hand, typically, as I was mentioning, you cannot ask one worker to solve the large task. You have to divide it into workflows. Okay, and there you have to think about how to compose the workflows, and that is what a lot of HCI research today is. I mean, a lot of people and a lot of companies are creating specific workflows for specific kind of tasks. So Casting Words is a company which does audio transcription, and it has some proprietary 17-step workflow to do high quality audio transcription. There are lots of interesting workflow types that are being studied in HCI literature, and we will focus on one of them called iterative improvement, but there are others like find, fix, verify, and so on and so forth. Different particular tasks. So this is for intelligent word processor. People have also started using crowdsourcing for counting the calories in your food plate, and every task requires a slightly different workflow. This is my favorite image of the this workflow. So this is work that was done at MIT by Greg Little, and this is his PhD thesis, and he asked the following question to the Turkers. He said, can you read this? So let me ask you the same question, assuming you haven't seen this before. Can you read this? I'm sure we have seen things like this when we go to the doctors and they want to write prescriptions for us. So I stared at this for 10 minutes. I had absolutely no idea of what was written here. However, what was most exciting is that Greg Little in 27 cents deciphered it using Mechanical Turk, almost deciphered it using Mechanical Turk. And the intuition was very simple. He would do some more notion of wisdom of crowd. So he would say, all right, you give me some words. Okay. Maybe somebody came along, he said, this looks like a U, maybe this is an or maybe this is a not, I don't know. They will have some ideas of what this is. Then that particular partially written artifact would go to the next worker for improvement. So the next worker will say, okay, you have deciphered some things, let me try and decipher some more. Now, you have to build in quality control whenever you are doing crowdsourcing. So that second worker who is trying to improve it may actually make it worse. So in order to make sure that the second worker did not make it worse, you will ask somebody which one is better. And instead of asking one person, you will ask several people which one is better, because again you have to put in crowdsourcing, quality control. So you ask several people which one is better. Based on what the better answer is, the better answer goes back here, and this process keeps happening. And if you are curious, this is the final answer. It says, you misspelled several words, please spell check your work next time, and so on and so forth. One of the interesting bits is that people thought that this was a signature of the person who wrote the comment, but actually it's a grade, it's B minus. So, alright, but there are many other examples of iterative improvement. Here is another one. Give me a description of this image. If you pay a lot of money to one person, you will not get that high quality description. On the other hand, if you did this notion of iterative improvement, one person came along, got his 1 cent and wrote this one sentence, and there is a spelling mistake, and it's just small. In a few iterations, it becomes this really nicely written, very well worded, very grammatically accurate, very clear description of this image. So when I saw this, and then I got really excited, because this showed to me that you can actually use crowdsourcing to solve much more interesting and much more complex tasks than the small bit-sized yes-no questions, which are also important, but relatively less exciting, at least personally to me. But then the quality control challenge in this is even more difficult, right? Because there are infinite possible answers. Which image description is the correct description? Well, all of them are correct descriptions. There is no notion of a correct answer. So you don't even know what quantity to track, right? There is no notion of a true value. But there is a notion of a quality. These are quality sensitive tasks. You can say that something has higher quality than the rest. So we defined this notion of quality Q as a measure of answer goodness. And then we said, all right, we are going to track the quality as more artifacts are getting created. It's a number between 0 and 1. So again, at the highest level, this is what is happening. You have an initial artifact. Think of it like an image description, alpha. It has some quality Q, which you don't know exactly. So therefore, you have a belief on it. And you have to figure out whether you need an improvement or not. If you decide not to have any improvement, then you submit alpha and your job is done. But if you decide to have an improvement, then you generate an improvement job. You give alpha to the people. Somebody comes along and gives you a new artifact, alpha prime, which they believe is an improvement of alpha prime. Improvement on alpha. So you estimate the quality, say Q prime of alpha prime, and then you figure out whether I need to do more voting. Do I need to ask which of Q and Q prime is better? And so you generate a ballot job, and somebody comes along and gives you a vote on it. That changes your posterior on alpha on Q and Q prime, and you repeat the process. And at some point you decide you don't need more voting, in which case you pick the one which is better of alpha and alpha prime, and you repeat the process. Yes?
The
Right. That's an excellent question. There are three answers to that, or three points here. What we do is that we assume that the costs are known to us and that is fixed. So how much we are going to pay in improvement and how much we are going to pay in ballots is prefixed. Okay, it's given to us as an input. Moreover, it has been shown that if you pay more to a person in a crowdsourcing environment, they will not give you higher quality output. However, the task will complete faster. So, if you had to optimize your completion time, you should price it differently. If you want to make your task finish faster, you have to pay them more money. But the quality that you are going to get is going to be more or less the same. There is one more nuance here, and that is to do with the fact that, and that also was your question, which is very interesting, can I pay more to people who give me higher quality output? First of all, you need to somehow track that they gave you higher quality output, which is on its own a difficult problem. But you may imagine that AI techniques might be able to help you with that. The way you can pay them more is by giving them bonus. So you have to predetermine the price, but after they did the work, if you really like their work, you can pay them bonus. And I have some ideas on how we can automatically figure out how much bonus do we give and to whom. But in this work, we were not asking those questions. We assume that the amount of money we will pay for the jobs is predetermined. All right, and again the decision making problem is, do I need more improvement, do I need more voting? Now, I won't go into the details of the model, but the idea again here is that you have two artifacts alpha and alpha prime, you have qualities q and q prime. You have to define the notion of difficulty. An artifact which has higher quality is more difficult to improve, so your difficulty depends on q. Figuring out which one is better depends on how the difference between q and q prime. So we had some models. We have to have two worker ability parameters, gamma I and gamma b, because some workers may not be so very good in English and in writing, but they may be good in reading and figuring out which one is better. So they may have different gamma improvement and different gamma ballots. You have to define a POMDP. Your state is q and q prime. Your transition probabilities are that somebody does a new task and they get a new artifact alpha prime with quality q prime. So you have to create a transition probability. But again, the main point I would like you to take is that the ideas are the same. You still need a POMDP, we still need a model. And let's skip this part because we are running out of time. Let me show you some experiments. And so the experiments here are on 40 images, same average cost. We are using exactly the methods that Greg Little had in his thesis, where in the voting case he is asking two people. If they disagree, he is going to ask the third person and do majority. But the number of iterations are such that the amount of money spent here and amount of money spent here is the same. And you can see that Clowder is giving much higher quality output. Now quality on the other hand is an internal metric, so it is not very clear how much the quality difference means. So we ask the question, how much more money would I have to pay in a static workflow in order to get the same quality output on average? And so we ask that question, and to get the same quality output, a static workflow has to pay 29% more money. So in some sense, you can think of our methods to be saving money for the same quality output or getting higher quality output for the same money. To me personally, what was even more interesting is the kind of decisions the system ended up making. So this is the static workflow and the number of ballots used per iteration. So first iteration, somebody gives me first artifact. Second iteration, somebody improves and you have to do a voting. So either you would do 2 votes or 3 votes. On average, you do 2.4 votes. So your number of ballots per iteration stays static. On the other hand, the Clowder system decided to do this kind of a voting pattern. Now when we stared at it, we had no idea why such a voting pattern was considered good by our Clowder system. But when we explored more, it was very intuitive in hindsight. So what is happening is that initially the qualities of the artifacts are so low that there is no point in asking which one is better. Anybody is going to be able to improve the artifact in the initial iterations. So the system saves money and does not do any votes, trusts the improvement. As the number of iterations increase, the system says that the artifact is harder and harder to improve, so I am going to ask more and more workers for votes. And at some point there is a dip, and the dip is that the system believes that the artifact is really hard to improve, so even if the first person says that it is not an improvement, that person is trusted, and so there is a dip and the process stops. So this is a very interesting and intelligent use of ballots, something that we had not anticipated ahead of time, but something that is really nice. And these kind of discoveries are only possible when you are using AI technology and generating these things in a data-driven fashion. Alright, so to summarize, Clowder can control much more complex tasks also. The intuitions are the same. You have to have a BaseNet for representing knowledge, POMDP for control. It also gives you some unforeseen intelligent behavior, and because the same ideas are getting used over and over, you feel that you may be able to extend to more generic workflows. Let me quickly skip over this. The intuition here was that if I have the same problem that can be solved using multiple workflows, what do I do? So usually what happens, if I have multiple workflows, say different interfaces or something like that, we do A/B testing. When we do A/B testing, we figure out this is a better interface or this is a better workflow. We choose that and move on forever. We get married to the best, right? And that's okay. That's not bad. But what we observed is by having two workflows, it is even better. Why? Because the two workflows may give you independent evidence on the same answer. So if the two workflows agree, you are much more confident that this is the correct answer. Moreover, if one workflow is giving you mixed answers, that may be a suggestion that you should switch to the second workflow. Maybe that workflow is going to give you more clear answers. So those intuitions got modeled in this problem, which we call dynamic switching between synergistic workflows. So both the workflows are aimed to get to the same point. Therefore, they are synergistic, but giving somewhat of an independent answers. So here our baseline, this is for named entity recognition tasks, and here our baseline is very strong. This is not majority voting. This is Clowder system which is operating on the single best workflow. However, it is getting a 50% error reduction by using the power of switching between the different workflows. There's a lot of, so this is pretty much what I wanted to discuss most of today. There's a lot of related work. So there's a huge amount of buzz in this area. There are a lot of researchers who are working on this. Some at Microsoft Research Cambridge and some at Microsoft Research Redmond also. And I'm told that some of you here are also trying to use crowdsourcing in a variety of ways. For example, AJ Kamar and Eric Horvitz have worked on Galaxy Zoo projects and so on and so forth. There's a lot of work that is happening. And again, I think what distinguishes us from everybody else or most of everybody else is the fact that we have worked on so diverse number of problems, diverse kinds of problems, and also worked both on the modeling as well as the control aspects, which has not been the case in many other scenarios. So let me summarize now. What I talked about is design of a system called Clowder. It's a crowdsourcing support tool for requesters. It will perform integrated quality control by learning, optimization and control of workflows, and it achieves a much higher cost quality trade-offs. I gave you 4 examples, some briefly, some in detail. Simple multiple choice tasks, tasks where data filling has to happen, more complex tasks, and I gave you one example of iterative improvement, and what happens if you have multiple workflows per task. Let me take 2 slides and quickly talk about where we can go next. So the point here is that this is really a wide open space. Crowdsourcing got popular only in the last 3 to 4 years. There's a huge amount of activity, but there's a lot of work to be done in this space. For example, just on the optimization and control, there are many other problems to be solved. So what happens if you have multiple correct answers, not just one correct answer, but multiple correct answers? You want to create a list. That is a problem we haven't worked on. I don't think anybody has worked on. I was talking to Bill Thies about this, and what happens if I want to get sorted list of something by using work. So you may have lots of images and you want to sort images in terms of how aesthetically pleasing they are, or lots of songs and you want to sort them in which one is good and not. You may have clustering problems. You want to cluster different products in different clusters, and you may have many other complex workflows. How do I optimize them? How do I control them? How do I get high quality? Is still a very, very open problem. in the AI leap, the way we want to move forward is that we want to design a workflow language where you can come along and give me your workflow and we can automatically optimize it for you. And the main question is, how do I take your workflow and convert it into a POMDP and a Bayesian network? And if we can do that, that will be problem solved, although sometimes you may find really large POMDPs and that may take some effort to solve. And of course, we want to release Clowder for requesters to use more broadly. Now, of course, this is not just needed only for Mechanical Turk, it can be extended to many other scenarios. For example, I talked about Galaxy Zoo early in the talk, and there are lots of interesting questions that we can answer. What is a worker good at? Is this task good for them or is that task good for them? Picking the right contributors, as we were discussing. Can I also educate a worker who has been giving us good inputs over the time but is making specific mistakes over and over again? Can we do educational interventions? And that leads me to my interest in personalized online education. Kumran mentioned it in the beginning. To be honest, I haven't really worked on it, but what I have been thinking about is how online education space and the crowdsourcing space are so tightly interlinked. So as we are tracking different workers for their skills and abilities, we may want to track different students for their learning that they have done so far. There is the same problem. As we may assign a work to a worker, we may assign different peer gradings to different students. And so in the process, an AI agent would be able to automatically boost the learning of a student, support the student in their learning, and make the online education platform more successful. And of course, in the long run, as we have more data, I would really hope that we are able to personalize education based on individual needs and learning styles as different people start to have courses and slides and content on a single platform, and different people take different courses. We can use the data for personalization of education, which would be really awesome, personally speaking. Thank you very much for listening. And I forgot to mention in the beginning, this is work that was done by two of my students, Chris Lin and Pang Dai. Pang Dai is now graduated. He works at Google and in collaboration with Dan Weld. So they get all the credit for this as well. Thank you for listening and happy to take questions.
Any questions?
Yeah.
Oh, just curious. So, optimizing the cost sounds interesting when there's some well-defined notion of what answer is correct or what answers are better than others. Other people, I guess researchers frequently use Turk as a survey methodology. So you actually want somehow a random sample of people to get a representative sample of the population. Have you thought, are there ways of optimizing while maintaining some statistical randomness?
Right. So that's a fascinating question. We haven't worked on that yet, but I will be surprised if it is too hard. Because the question that you want to ask is that, is this a representative sample? And how much money, if it is not, how much more money would I have to pay to get a representative sample? So what is the probability it is not, and how much money am I going to pay for me to get there? And that will give me the decision theoretic optimization. So how much is it worth to spend more money to get a representative sample? These are the exact questions that we are asking. The only thing we need to understand is whether it is a representative sample or what is the probability it is a representative sample.
Yeah, but then you need to learn, who's representative of who and with respect to what.
If you're asking random questions, so you have to obviously create a model. So if you ask all your questions at a certain time of day, then it's most likely not a representative sample because many people are sleeping at that point. So you have to come up with some features that give you some intuition of whether you have captured the random sample or not. But once we can come to that, that's a problem specific scenario. Once you do that, these ideas of POMDP and Bayesnet are going to help you in optimizing that process. Yes.
To do just the inverse of that, there's a growing interest in small, well-defined crowds that are sort of like expert crowds of various sorts and things like that. And in these cases, I'm just wondering how well any of these techniques sort of apply in spaces where you've got, a small crowd that's actually been trained to a certain degree, and you're trying to optimize for that.
I would argue that it is exactly the same problem. And the reason it is exactly the same problem, either there is a problem and it is exactly the same problem, or there is no problem. Okay. So if you have a trained expert crowd which knows exactly how to answer the question perfectly every time, then you don't even need majority voting. Ask one person and just, so then there is no problem. So then there is nothing there. But usually what happens is, even if you have a trained set of crowd, there's always a bell curve that happens. So there's always a distribution of their abilities, that the mean may be high, the variance may not be too large, but there is still a distribution. And whenever there is a distribution, you have to start to figure out, how do I automatically balance that? How do I make use of the good worker better? How do I track the good worker? How many people do I ask? And those questions are going to be exactly the same. I don't think our techniques hinge on the fact that the crowd has to be too large. Small crowds are as good.
Do your techniques have any ability to deal with the preferences of the crowd? So I mean, that seems to be something that's critical in a lot of crowds. Is what's motivating for individuals is very different.
Right. That's a fascinating one, and that's really a question for mechanism design people, HCI people, social science researchers. Lots of people are studying incentive mechanisms. People are studying the fact that if a game is fun, if a task is fun, not a game, a task is fun, you can choose to price it lower, because people are still going to spend more time playing it, answering it, because it's going to be fun for them. Or what is the value of a leaderboard, or what is the value of paying a bonus, or how do I retain workers, and things like that. So there are a lot of these, analysis that is happening. There are a lot of design questions that people are asking. How do I get truthful answers to people? Those are also the questions that are getting asked. We haven't done a lot of that in this work. What I am personally interested in. Right. So first of all, there's a lot of self-selection that is happening on Mechanical Turk, because people are choosing to do these jobs, whatever their value system be, because there are hundreds or thousands of jobs on Mechanical Turk. They figure out which ones they want to choose. So you can hope that many of them are choosing because they feel they are good at this, or they will at least be able to do a reasonable job. That may not be always true. What I am personally more interested in that space is to automatically do worker work matching. That would be something that is very exciting to me, except that getting that data is very hard. So we have tried to talk to Amazon folks, but they're not willing to share their data. So there's another platform where a lot of tasks are around and a lot of workers have worked on it, and we have some notion of who is good at that, or we can compute some notion. Then we might be able to understand that these set of tasks go together, these set of workers go together, these set of workers are good at these set of tasks. So a new task comes along, we can quickly figure out which bin it is in, and therefore we will know a lot about all the workers, even though they may not have worked on that task till now. And that will really help us in optimizing it faster. Otherwise, we'll have to learn about each new task from scratch, which will take a lot of boot up time.
So in your experiments, do you find incentive compatibility becoming an issue or not? Like, do you face, in theory it should be an issue, but maybe not really, that suppose I just want to earn, I get the same money whether I answer correctly or not, so what motivation do I have to do?
Right. No, you have to put in some reputation mechanisms in order to make these things successful. Again, I'm not a game theory researcher, but there are very simple methods that people use on Mechanical Turk. One of the methods is that they will price it right. Because if you price it too low, then people will not take it after a couple of jobs. And if you price it too high, then a lot of spammers will come at it, and all the data would be low quality. Okay. So there's the suggested $3.60 an hour, or some kind of a rate like that, and we usually follow something close to that so that we stay in the average scenario. The other thing that we do is that we only allow the workers which have 95% approval rating. Now this is not a foolproof mechanism, but it does get rid of many of the spammers. Not all, but many. And the reason is that people usually do not get that high approval rating. Now, what is also started to happen slowly is that some kind of an approval rating inflation is happening, because workers the requesters realize that if they give low rating to a worker, then that hurts the worker in the long run. So they have stopped reducing their rating, and so maybe sometime down the line that will start to hurt us a little bit more. But then our techniques are geared to understand how good the workers are doing. So if the workers are not doing very well, we have the option of choosing them to pay less. Choosing to pay them less. Of course, we haven't exercised the option in these experiments, but if the requester has that value system, then they can say that I will only pay the worker if they give me the correct answer. And that's a fair mechanism.
So this rating is a
The rating is their single rating that has been around forever based on their history of jobs. Now workers try to cheat the system. They create new accounts over and over, and things like that also happen. But I believe that whenever you have any scenario where people are involved, some kinds of games are going to happen. You can't live without it. I am not a game theory researcher, but we are using some very basic checks that allow us to get to good places.
When people talk about optimizing the cost per task or so, is there a distinction between optimizing the return for me as one of many competitive hirers on Turk versus the global optimum? So for example, if everyone was to use Clowder, would they, and I think there are some optimizations that would help everyone, but there are others that would kind of cancel out potentially. Like I might increase my efficiency by just restricting the IP address of the worker to be in Seattle or something. That, I mean, you could publish, could potentially also improve the efficiency of the thing. So I wonder, I mean, can you separate actually the workflow optimizations that are kind of like removing floating point operations from a computation, like those kinds of actual optimizations that are independent of, everyone can apply them to mutual benefit, versus things that are kind of stealing from someone, like you're stealing the good workers, in a sense. And so someone else's task is getting worse when the Clowder task is getting better.
No, I wouldn't claim that at all. So yes, we have a check of 95% approval rating, which is independent of the theoretical constructs that I talked about, which is the practical side of it. Yes, that part of it is stealing good worker from somebody else, and but the optimizations that we are doing here are just saying that we won't need to ask this question again.
Right, I think the interesting is just separate the two. Quantify
Yes.
what fraction of the speed up applies to everyone, and what fraction is the competitive.
That's a fair question. Yeah, but we haven't thought about it very much so far. Well, I do agree. I mean, this is also true for some of these. This is off topic, like these navigation systems. If you start sending everybody through a certain route, which is supposed to be, unpopulated or not very heavily used, suddenly the dynamic shifts. So as soon as you put something in the real world, if people start using it, then it's worse. If people don't use it, a few people use it, then you can game the system and you can get a value of it. Those are questions that happen everywhere in all the scenarios.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mausam will be here a little later, so if you want to talk to him, just let us know. Thank you.
Thank you.